Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on getting started with policy and procedure writing. I'm Lisa Silverman. I'm URAC's Client Education Specialist, and I'm thrilled to be here with so many of you today. I'm joined by some awesome team members from URAC. I've got Heather Boname with us. She's our Director of Pharmacy. Many of you probably know her. Jen Richards, she's our Senior Director for Product Development, and Jeff Wusso, who's our Business Development Executive. They'll all be on stage at different times during the webinar today. They're great speakers, and they're also totally comfortable with interruptions. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to chime them in the chat box. Here is our agenda for today. I'm not going to read it all out to you. You all can read really well. But we're going to go over the importance of policies and procedures. We're going to talk about why we do them, developing them, training your staff on them, maintenance, and then we'll even have some tips and hints about what we like to see in our policies and procedures when our clients submit them to us as part of the accreditation application process.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jeff Wusso, one of URAC's business development team members. I joined URAC back in 2021, and I have national responsibility as the business development executive for many of URAC's pharmacy and administrative management programs. Because some of you are new to the accreditation process, I'd like to provide some background information on URAC itself and why we believe in accreditation. URAC has been improving quality in healthcare for nearly 35 years. We're an independent accreditor, and we do not provide consulting services. We also believe that you don't need us to tell you what policy or procedure is best for your organization. Today, we're here to help you understand the basics of policies and procedures so you can be better prepared to apply for accreditation. We pride ourselves in keeping the accreditation process fair and completely free of bias. Our reviewers are all clinicians themselves and average 20 years of experience in healthcare. The majority of our reviewers have been with URAC for at least 5 years, and they're experts in our programs and understand what contributes to high quality healthcare. The slide you're looking at here features some of URAC's partners. These organizations help us develop programs, provide feedback on standards, and are participants on some of our committees. Next slide, please. URAC offers over 40 accreditation and certification programs so we can impact quality in many areas of healthcare. And we're continually expanding our offerings, including our new health equity accreditation, mental health at work accreditation, and our new health contact center accreditation. Next slide. Here are the names and logos of just a few of our clients. You may recognize some of them, but others are just like some of the smaller organizations attending this webinar. We're proud to offer accreditations and certifications to organizations that have fewer than 10 staff members and to organizations that have tens of thousands of employees. Next slide. This is an overview of the process for those of you who are new. We try to make our process easy to understand. After you submit your application information to us, your URAC assigned reviewer will start a desktop review of the application, following up with a request for information if necessary. A validation review will also be scheduled. Once the validation review is complete, your reviewer will submit your blinded application to URAC's Accreditation Committee for final determination. URAC's Accreditation Committee meets twice a month, and we notify applicants of their accredited status shortly after the committee decision. If you have any questions about the process during the webinar, feel free to type them into the chat box and one of our team members will answer them. Next slide. One of the hallmarks of the URAC accreditation process is the support we proudly provide our clients. You'll have both a client relations manager and an experienced accreditation reviewer assigned to your account. We'll also provide you with access to your program-specific accreditation guide, a guide to using AccreditNet, URAC's accreditation application software, and access to URAC's client information hub. So I want to thank you again for being with us today. I'll leave my contact information in the chat box and feel free to reach out to me with any questions about starting the accreditation process. Here is Jen to talk about the importance of policies and procedures.
Awesome, thanks, Jeff. So I wanted to start out today by highlighting the importance of policies and procedures and really going through some of those reasons why we really want to have policies and procedures within organizations. So policies and procedures are not only important to URAC, but are also used by employees and consultants internally and could even possibly help you with regulators externally. Each organization is going to have a different priority when it comes to policies and procedures. And there are so many different references discussing why policies and procedures are important. So, as many reasons as you can think of on your own, including these internal reasons, establishing rules of conduct and protecting business interests, to demonstrating continuing compliance with standards and meeting regulations and requirements from an external perspective. Regardless of your organization type and size, having policies and procedures are really crucial to success. Next slide. So we'll go through some definitions to really discuss what the difference is between a policy and a procedure. Policies really are those rules, those principles, those guidelines that are adopted to reach the long-term goals. It's typically published in a shared repository. It's something that the entire organization lives by. The procedures are those specific methods or those specific steps that are required to put those policies into action every day. Both together are really what's going to get you to the long-term goal and result in an outcome that is compatible with whatever viewpoint you as an organization is trying to put forward. So you want to start by defining the outcome you wish to achieve. This could be anything from, we want to ensure a patient has access to services, or we will have a plan for ensuring we can continue business operations during an emergency. Then the procedure is going to highlight what is really needed to be able to get there. Next slide for me. So for every step outlined in your procedure, you should be getting closer and closer to that stated goal or stance, whatever was written into as part of your policy statement. So this is another slide just showing you how those two work together and how you get to an end result based on how you're using those two. We're going to go to the next slide anyway. Thanks, Lisa. So examples of each. For example, you might want to use a policy statement that talks about organization providing all members with the necessary training, personal protective equipment needed to protect them from communicable diseases. Your procedure, the how, is going to outline what you're going to do to ensure that that policy is met. For example, headquarters will mail a box of supplies to remote staff every other month with masks, gloves, and hand sanitizer. Another example of this, will meet the special needs of persons who are deafblind or hard of hearing. And part of that procedure might include that team members will submit a request for patient materials to be created with options for large print, braille, or screen readers to the marketing team. Again, these are very simple examples. That is not the overall, if you were to submit these policies and procedures, you would not meet the full intent of the standards associated with either of these policies. These are examples of steps that you would need to incorporate or steps that you may incorporate in order to meet the policy. You want to make sure that both are relevant to you and your organization and how you would get to the exact outcome that you're looking for. Next slide for me. So we've really gone through some of the importance and definitions and worked through, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we setting these policies and procedures? So let's talk a little bit more about some of the benefits that you might see through this. So you could define the organization's stance or goal on a topic, create a consistent message across the entire organization. You could be looking to control outcomes through a very specific defined process so that you're seeing the same event or the same outcome every single time. You may be looking to ensure employee expectations are very clear. What is expected of them and why or how? It does make training much easier if you have a very solid and definitive set of policies and procedures that really reflect your organization and what you expect. And then lastly, you could be looking to manage and reduce company risk.
So our speakers, as I said, know that when I come on camera, it's to ask them a question. Jen, one of the other things I think policies do for us is they help keep us safe and they help prevent mistakes from happening. So in healthcare, we are always looking at both of those. So if there's a policy that's done in a company procedure, let's talk for just a quick minute about what kind of mistakes can those prevent? How does this benefit both patient care? I mean, we're all healthcare here. How is this ultimately benefiting patient care?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, really, if you're talking about controlling outcomes through defined processes and then ensuring employee expectations, both of those really work together to help minimize risk to patients within the healthcare industry. You're looking for those processes to be step by step, exactly what they need to do, and they can follow that and know that they're within range of ensuring safety and minimizing risk. And then on top of that, you could create expectations of employees on, if they are having to come outside of that systematic process, what are the expectations? What would you require of your employees to ensure that they are thinking about and minimizing the risk as much as possible?
Awesome. Thanks,
In
Jen.
our own, I'll keep going with this just for a second. In our own process, at URAC, we actually found, that we were creating, or that we were having errors within a certain process, specifically around the client hub. And we ended up creating a process around it to ensure that the steps were taken the same way every single time, that our risk and the organization and the client's risk were minimized. They didn't have as many issues and they weren't coming back to us all the time for additional information. As well as creating that expectation that this is how we're going to do this process every single time.
Absolutely. And Jen, an area I think this comes into play, we see really heavily these days is with data security and data breaches. So, it's a great way if you're like, hey, we're seeing all of these, if you're reading the news like we are, we're seeing all of these with data security, patient information, like those policies and procedures for how do you put stuff in? Who has access? When you have to lock computers? Who has access to what computers and what rooms and what platforms? Can really actually save you a lot of trouble down the long run. You don't necessarily want to be one of those organizations we see in the news. Jen, I'll stop here. I know you have more to go.
Yeah, so before we really move into the development process, I do want to recognize the comment that was in the chat. Many times a policy and procedure is the basis for a more detailed SOP. That is 100% true. Sometimes you'll see policies as a single document, SOPs as a second document. Sometimes you'll see a policy and procedure where it gives you a brief overview of the procedure with a detailed SOP in the as a secondary document. We're not specific at URAC, and we're not prescriptive in exactly how those documents are all written. We will tell you whether or not we need a policy or a procedure or process or something to that effect. We recognize that as organizations incorporate and pull together these documents, they're doing it based off of whatever they need as an organization to ensure that they're meeting the goals they're trying to achieve. So thank you for pulling that forward. When we talk about the development process, we're talking more about overall development. And so you can use this in a policy document, in an SOP document, any type of document that you're formalizing and trying to put forward in order to achieve a specific goal. So in general, you probably want to start with a template. And we're really talking about a template that is going to give you the same kind of feel and look, and everybody knows how to use it consistently so that they're doing the same thing over and over again. This is actually a good way to create consistency up front, even in creating policies and procedures. So look for a template that you can use as a base for all of your policies and or procedures and or SOPs. If you do a web search for policy and procedure templates, you will come up with multiple. There are so many out there. Pick one that works for you, or even create your own from scratch, whatever makes the most sense. If you are going to use a template from a consultant where the policies and procedures are mostly filled out and you need to, as an organization, go in and fill in the rest or fill in the blanks, make sure that you understand every word that is in that document and that it accurately reflects your own practices. So make sure you have your organization's name and logo. Use a strong numbering and naming convention. You really want to think through how you're going to manage the numbering and naming so that everybody understands what's in that policy and whether or not you have an order to the policy or you have attached policies that are similar, or if you have a policy with an SOP that are connected. All of that should be thought through, and you should probably continue to, or probably look through and make sure that you have that consistent numbering all the way through. Include your key dates on the policy, or even within, if you're using a platform to manage your documents, make sure that you have key dates that are attached to that policy. Effective date, review date, and revision date. And then you also need to know who that approval authority is. URAC standards require consistent documentation of all dates and the approval authority for policies and processes. This can be on the policy and procedure itself, on a master list, in a knowledge management software, any other formal way of documenting these items that you can find and look backwards over a period of at least the 3 years if you're in between accreditations. The development process, so we're talking about more of the body of the policy and procedure. Again, you want to make sure that you're using a consistent process or a consistent template so that you can make sure that all of this is consistently used every single time. So the title of the policy and procedure should accurately reflect the purpose. Again, focus on numbering and naming so that you are consistent and that you have a very easy way of finding everything. Create a policy purpose statement. This really gives you that overarching goal up front. What are we trying to achieve? What do we want to see happen within our organization? And then you can define the scope and responsibilities as well. Who does this touch? Who is responsible for implementing? Or who is maybe responsible for ensuring that we have a consistent outcome every single time. And then you're going to create your step-by-step process on how employees should go about achieving that goal or stance. This may be within the policy and procedure itself, or you may decide that you really want to have an SOP as a separate document or a procedure as a separate document, and those two correlate and go together. Next slide. So just a little bit of additional information. You may want to include different sections for different things. So for example, if you have any reference to materials, this may be good if you're using a policy and an SOP and you need to reference back and forth between them. Include a section that allows that reference back and forth. You may want to include a section on laws and regulations. This could be really important if you're talking about policies and procedures on HIPAA, security, tracking regulations, licensure, any of those other types of policies that are directly related to ensuring that you're following laws and regulations. And then you may have a section for external resources. If you have a policy and procedure on health literacy, you may want to have an external resources section that outlines what are the resources that helped you develop that policy on health literacy. A definition section can be really important if you are using unique terminology that is very specific to your organization, or if you're using acronyms or abbreviations and you want to make sure that you define those within that section.
Jen, I don't think we can stress this enough here. We know healthcare is essentially jargon city, right? We all use it, and all of our organizations might have let's say the 3 letters AMP, but that could mean many different things to 30 different organizations. It could even mean many things within your organization. I know I work on a great team, but at times we're really just talking to each other in initials and in code. So make sure that these acronyms are spelled out again clearly, and make sure that they're noted the first time as well. What's everyday speak to me and Jen may not be everyday speak to Jeff and our sales team. So we just need to always keep that in mind of what are we looking at here? What does this actually mean? And not getting too jargony that somebody couldn't come in and understand that.
Yep. Yeah, we talk a lot of different terms and a lot of different acronyms at URAC. And even if we're talking about desktop review and DTR, which is something that we talk about all the time, it's where we review your policies and procedures. But if you are outside of the accreditation realm, that is a very weird term. And nobody knows what it means. So,
Jen,
so.
you're about to talk about the master list, and this is a really great opportunity for our clients to come on in here and to tell us how do they maintain their master list. So those of you who are already accredited by us, who have been successful, I want you to listen to what Jen is saying and chime in your tips and how do you keep things organized here in this next section. And as always, please put your questions into the chat box. We love having them.
Sure. So yeah, and everybody feel free to comment as well in the chat box. Anything that you have learned about master lists or managing documents, managing policies and procedures that you think would be really helpful for other organizations, or even that you maybe struggled with, is a good option, or is a good way to use the chat box. We're going to talk about the master list just in general. I want to start out by saying URAC no longer requires a master list. It is not something that we have within our standards anymore. At one point we did. We recognized that there's quite a few different systems out there that allow organizations to manage their documents in a way that does not require an Excel spreadsheet or some other form of master list that is very manual. So whatever system or process you use to list out all of your policies and SOPs and procedures and whatever else you have, that's really what we're talking about here. That may be done through a knowledge management software or system, or some other policy and procedure document system, or it may even be an Excel spreadsheet. Whatever works for your organization is fine with us. And really, this is for you internally to be able to see all of those policies and procedures and the dates associated and who's responsible and all of that. Every single policy and or procedure should have the policy name and the policy number with the dates that we've talked about and the person responsible attached to it, whether that's documented on the document itself, the policy and procedure document itself, or you do it within the system is completely fine, or even within an Excel spreadsheet. If you're just starting out with accreditation and you're looking for a way to manage all of these documents you're creating, sometimes an Excel spreadsheet is the best way to start off, just to see everything and document everything as you're going. And eventually you may get to a place where you're putting all of those things into a knowledge management software or something else. It's very helpful in just managing overarching policies and procedures. In Excel spreadsheets, if you are using that, a good way to help you identify timelines, review timelines, is to use conditional formatting within Excel. So there's opportunities to be able to visualize that data in a way that really helps you keep on top of things. So last thing I want to talk about is the relevancy piece of developing policies and procedures. So policies and procedures really do not need to control an employee's every action. It doesn't need to be so controlling that your employees feel like they can't do anything without following a policy and procedure. Make sure every step within the process is relevant to achieving the desired goal. That's kind of your bedrock. That's where you want to stick to. If you're writing in a policy or a process that doesn't get to that overarching goal, then you might be too restrictive, something to consider. If every step is relevant, it'll help achieve the outcome and you'll have an easier time training an easier time training employees on that policy and procedure. Also, not every policy and procedure is going to be relevant to every employee. If you have a policy and procedure on travel and travel expenses and making sure that you're expending your charges, then it's not going to be relevant for those employees that don't travel. So they may not need to read, sign off, acknowledge, understand any of those policies. Another example of this might be if you have policies and procedures on creating materials for patients or for clients. And you might have employees who really don't talk to patients, they don't develop materials at all. They're very much outside the scope of that type of policy and procedure. They probably don't need to be trained on that policy and procedure. So again, check your processes for relevancy. Is it really necessary to complete that step to achieve the overarching goal of the organization? Examples of controlling policies and procedures. Policies and procedures on when and how someone can use the bathroom. That might be a little overboard depending on your own organization and what you're doing. That might be something that you need to consider if you're in a call center and you're staffing phones all day. Another one is a policy and procedure on standing versus sitting. We require all of our members to sit at least 30 minutes a day. I don't know if that's necessary. Depends again on your own organization and what you're trying to do. If you are in a retail pharmacy setting, standing and sitting policies may become important. So now we're pretty much done on all of the thoughts around how to develop these policies and procedures, what you need to think about. So Heather's going to take us through some of the thoughts on employee training, and I'm going to pass it on to her. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you very much, Jen. As by way of introduction, again, my name is Heather Bonome. I'm the Director of Pharmacy with URAC. So I get to work with and manage the team of pharmacy accreditation reviewers that audit for our pharmacy programs. And we get to see, as such, firsthand many policies and procedures and get to see how, when they are implemented, they really can promote compliance and help organizations achieve their goals. So as Jen mentioned, we've got policies and procedures now. We've gone through the process to develop them. Let's look at next steps. I think the common theme that we kept on talking about is policies and procedures guide the work of employees so that the organization can meet their goals. So clearly we need to train the employees on those policies and procedures, again, as Jen mentioned, as they are relevant to that particular employee. Jen mentioned a couple of examples, I think, that were really good ones of policies that maybe don't need to be trained across the organization, a travel policy when not everyone travels. Let's think of one that would probably be pretty important for everybody to be trained on. Say you have a policy and procedure that outlines your organization's code of conduct. Hey, what are the expectations? What are prohibited behaviors? That's probably going to be something that's pretty important to make sure that all employees are trained on. You want to make sure that employees know where to access the policies and procedures so they can refer to them and potentially to promote the training as well. When we think about training, it's important to think about the mechanism for how you're going to train. That's probably going to depend as well on who you're training. Are you training new hires, or are you training existing staff on an existing policy as a refresher? Are you training existing staff on a policy because an important change has occurred? Depending on these different factors, this may be publishing of the revised policy, assigning individuals to review it and acknowledge that they have reviewed it, or it may be a live training. It may be a hands-on training. Again, thinking through who your audience is, what is the information that they need will likely guide how you think about how to train your staff. You probably want a policy and procedure on staff training. Probably, again, not only from the onboarding and new hire process, but from that ongoing training. And then also thinking about what is the goal of the training. So depending on the policy and procedure, what is that outcome? This is a task or a function that I need to make sure my employees have mastered or memorized, that they can, do without even thinking. And, an example of that might be, say you have some staff that take live calls from patients. And when they're presented with a scenario that could provide an immediate threat or present an immediate threat to the patient, how does the employee handle that? Well, you don't want them to have to take the time to look up their SOP as to how to handle that to promote patient safety. You want them to have that function mastered. And so how are you going to train to make sure that that policy and procedure is something that reaches mastery versus policies and procedures that maybe are not used daily, maybe not directly tied to immediate patient safety, and therefore can be available as a reference. Jen mentioned before about a policy on health literacy. When you're thinking about your consumer-facing materials and making sure that you are using plain language, what are the guidelines to ensure that plain language is used to promote health literacy? That might be a policy that you make sure that folks know exactly where that is. And when they're involved with consumer-facing materials, they know exactly where to go and how to reference that. All right. Jen spent a lot of time talking about creating policies to guide important work. Let's talk about maintaining those policies to make sure that they're relevant. And dare I say it, you probably want a policy on how policies and procedures are maintained to make sure that that is something that becomes a continuous part of your organization. If you think about this, again, with that theme of using policies and procedures to meet your organizational goals, as organizational goals change, your policies and procedures are likely going to need to change as well. So you want to think about how often are we going to periodically review our policies and procedures to make sure that they are relevant and that they are working and promoting good work that is resulting in positive goals. Then you want to think about when do we need to make ad hoc changes to our policies. So understanding the processes and the procedures around both of those. As a general rule, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, there is a URAC standard that requires policies and procedures to be reviewed and approved at least every 36 months. That is across the majority of our programs. We have a few legacy programs that are still looking for an annual review and approval, but for the most part, when you think about ongoing maintenance for review going forward, the standard is every 36 months in our standards. I will also say that URAC as an organization, we review our policies and procedures annually to make sure that they remain compliant.
Hey, Heather.
Jen,
So
did you pop on for a comment?
Yes, yes. So I just wanted to dive into that just a little bit further. So towards the end of the presentation, we will provide you our exact standards for what we are reviewing to today and what we have had in the past. Mm-hmm. We have had in the past the 12-month time frame. And so it's been at least 5 years. So all of our programs should no longer be on a 5-year time frame. So just FYI, we have updated everything.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you for that. Can we go back to the last slide, Lisa? Thanks, because we did talk quite a bit about that ongoing maintenance and review. But just a few things about when you do have a need to make an ad hoc change, because you are changing a policy or procedure, or because something has happened that you need to adjust something. It's really important to make sure that's documented in your policies and procedures before you make the change. And that when you're doing that, you're gathering input from all relevant folks. So if this touches 3 different parts of the organization, make sure you're pulling them in to say, hey, we're changing this downstream. How does that impact you? And does that need to be reflected in the policy and procedure? And then following through with all those things we just talked about with training, making sure that staff has access to the most up-to-date version of that policy as you roll it out. And then thinking about the training, the approach to training. Is this update something that we need to do a live training, a recorded training, or is this something that we can assign to folks to make sure that they are reviewing and acknowledging their that they are aware of the change? And of course, then correspondingly making sure if you have a master list that's updated. And as several folks have weighed in that they're using knowledge management software, often that will do that for you to show you what the most up-to-date version of the policy is. All right, Lisa, now I'm ready. Fantastic. So this slide is a really quick reference that's summarizing some of the do's and don'ts that we talked about. Let's start with the do's. Do make sure that you have policies that reflect your organization's goals, priorities, and workflows. Do, as was mentioned in the chat, use external documents to supplement your policies and procedures. A workflow document, an SOP, that can be hugely helpful to support those goals that are outlined in your policy. Be as clear as you can in your language to make sure that the employees who are going to be referring to those and training on those clearly understand. And then see if you can strike that balance of making the policy and procedure flexible while producing the desired outcome the majority of the time. So not being too prescriptive in the language and the steps that are included so that you can encourage skill development, growth, natural talents, but also the majority of time, make sure you're achieving the outcomes that you have. All right, a few don'ts. Don't forget to review your policies at least every 36 months and make sure that you're updating the review date to make that available to everybody. And then don't create new policies if you already have an existing policy on the topic. Update that policy. Do that as part of your revisions or ad hoc or whatnot, but don't just create a new policy on a new topic. If you have something that addresses that and you can amend that and still achieve what you're looking for there. Don't use policies and procedures that are not relevant to your organization. This ties to that example that Jen shared. A lot of organizations, when they're just getting started, they may partner with an external entity, maybe a consultant, to help them write their policies and procedures. They might use some templates to help assist them. That can be a great way to create your foundational policies and procedures. It's just really important to make sure that everything in those policies and procedures do pertain to your organization. Because if they don't, there's something that's irrelevant, you've got staff reading that, they know it doesn't apply to them, they're going to tune out, right? And they're not going to pay attention to the parts of that policy that are really important to their job. And don't write in a language that is difficult to understand. Again, making sure that the policies and procedures are clear enough to guide consistent and reliable work practices. Next slide, Lisa.
Oh, Heather, before you go on to the next slide, we have a great question here from John Schultz. He's asking, what elements are absolutely required as sections in a company procedure? He said, I've seen differences between organizations, which is what we love at URAC, because no two organizations are the same and no two organizations do their business in the same way. But John is asking for examples. Do they always have to have an objective, responsibility, scope, approvals? And I'd love to hear in the chat. That's another great spot. Heidi is our reviewer in the chat. Maybe she can speak to a little bit about what she's seen. But Heather, do we require anything in particular?
Yeah, so again, there are a lot of best practices that Jen just walked through. Jen is going to share a slide as we wrap up that specifically outlines what URAC looks for. So I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm going to let her do that in just a few slides. But certainly, I think in the chat, it would be great to share amongst organizations, what are the best practices? What have they seen? And what's really helpful to individual organizations as they are developing their policy and procedure templates.
Thank you, Heather. I'll go to your next slide.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I want to highlight some considerations. This is a little more specific because to URAC accreditation. So to this point, we've really been talking very generally about creating your policies and procedures and then maintaining and educating on them. But let's just shift a little bit and say you are seeking URAC accreditation or you're seeking a URAC reaccreditation. And let's think about some specific tips and hints there. One of the things that Jeff mentioned as he was talking about, is kicking things off, and he just talking about the URAC accreditation review process, was the fact that URAC conducts a desktop review before we conduct our validation review. So that desktop review is a very, very comprehensive review of documentation for how organizations demonstrate compliance with each of the standards, with the goal of making sure that there is a policy and procedure in place so that we can all be more confident that when we conduct that validation review, the organization has that processor in place. So again, we see a lot of policies and procedures because the majority of the documentation we're reviewing on desktop review is a policy or procedure. So a couple things to think about. If you're seeking accreditation for the first time, the scope of that accreditation is going to be from the date that you submit your application. So we're talking about, 3 or 4 months worth of documentation. When you're going through reaccreditation, we've got a whole accreditation cycle to look for compliance, and accreditation cycles are 3 years. So sometimes with reaccreditations, there's more documentation for us to look at, and that can be perceived as being a little more difficult or challenging. The key there, again, is going to be maintaining your policies and procedures, making sure on an ongoing basis you're up to date, and that should set you up for success when you're going through reaccreditation. This is a key one. URAC does not expect you to have a separate policy and procedure for each standard or each element. In fact, we would discourage that. Often, one policy and procedure can address multiple standards or elements. We have a lot of standards. Maybe you have a policy that is around your quality management committee and how that quality management committee is conducted. That may cover 3, 4, or 5 different standards, and that is absolutely appropriate to use that document clearly cited for us to review to demonstrate compliance with those standards.
Hey, Heather. So we actually have a really good question in the chat similar to this. So while we don't require separate procedures for each standard or, we're not looking for very specific policies and procedures for specific standards, the same applies if you are seeking multiple accreditations across multiple different organizations, not just URAC. If you're looking for, if you're in an organization who requires 2 accreditations from 2 different organizations or something like that, your policies and procedures don't have to be written specifically for URAC and then specifically for another accreditor. What we would ask you to do is make sure that your policy meets the intent of that standard, and then highlight and cite that area regardless of where it falls. The one other piece of this is, there's different terminology used across different organizations, different accrediting organizations. That's pretty common, not just, within the pharmacy space, but other types of industries as well. That's a really good way of using, or a really good example of a time when you might want to use your definitions. to highlight what you mean by what you're saying in your policy and procedure so that we know when you're talking about this is what you mean.
Jen and Heather, I just want to acknowledge there are a bunch of questions coming in the chat, but we are at 2:51 Eastern time. So if we don't get to your question today, look for a follow-up from us in the next week or so.
Got it. Thank you. All right. I will move things along. And thank you for jumping in on that question, Jen. If you are the point of contact for URAC, knowing which standards impact your policies and procedures can be really important, right? You're going to have policies and procedures that are well beyond the scope, likely, of URAC accreditation. And so understanding that as you see policies and procedures being updated in your organization, oh, this may impact compliance with standards, is going to be a good thing to keep in mind. When we talk about the documents that you will upload for your desktop review, make sure you are really clear. We have an accreditation guide, and within our accreditation guide, we have a section called Demonstrating Compliance. Within each standard, we'll have the standard listed there, and then there's a section that says Demonstrating Compliance Desktop Review. And in that will be a bulleted saying, we're looking for a policy here. We're looking for an SOP. We're looking for a sample workflow. So make sure that you're following that as a guide as to what we are looking for when we are going to be reviewing our desktop review. And then make sure, again, the point of the desktop review is you have these policies and procedures in place and that you're following them. If you have policies and procedures documented, but you're not following them, you're likely not going to be successful on your validation review and then with achieving accreditation. So it's key to make sure that that follows through. Next slide, Lisa. Great. Again, just emphasizing some of the tips that we went to our reviewers and said, what do you want folks to know when they're thinking about policies and procedures? Quality of your policy and procedure is more important than quantity. Own your policies and procedures. We hear it all the time. And make sure that folks are trained so you know what you do and that you're keeping your policies up to date so that they are relevant to the work that's being done. I want to make sure that we have time to pass this off to Jen. She's going to share a specific standard example with us and help to answer the question that was posed to us just a few minutes ago.
Perfect. Thank you, Heather. So as you can see, we have moved our standards over time. Things have changed over time. And so what you're seeing here are two different versions that we have had in the past of our maintaining and complying with policies and procedures standard. The one that you're going to see on the left is our most recent. It's in pretty much every program since 2022. And so if you're on specialty pharmacy or health plan or case management, IRO, those policy and procedure standards are going to be similar to what you're seeing on the left-hand side. The right-hand side reflects a very old version. It's at least 5 years old. And at the same time, we still had it at least every 36 months to the month as a review time frame. The things that we require at URAC for documentation's sake for every policy and procedure is going to be the effective dates, review dates, revision dates, and identification of approval authority. That has not changed since at least my 10 years with URAC. And those will be the things that we continue to review along the way. In addition to reviewing policies and procedures every 36 months, we do also ask that you disseminate new, changed, or updated policies and procedures to your staff and have a process for ensuring that they understand what is expected of them within those new, changed, or updated policies and procedures.
Thanks, Jen. I'm coming back. We have a closing poll. We just need to know where you want more information. Jen, I'm going to put up this poll and I'm not going to share the results. But while I'm doing that, do you want to we have a couple of really great questions in the audience. I'm going to let you decide which ones you want to take here because you and Heather are awesome at these.
Perfect. So let's start with citations. And so actually I'm going to pose this to Heather because her team is in charge of reviewing all of the policies and procedures that you would submit to us, demonstrating your compliance with, any of our standards. So what is the recommended way to cite standards in the policies?
I love this question because we were just talking today about how we're going to do even more education on this. So this is great. And I mean, the short answer is, as long as it is clear to the reviewer where to look, we are very happy. In AccrediTnet, when you link your document, there is a box, there's a citation box. And if you can put in the citation box, page 2, paragraph 3, we know exactly where to go. Some organizations will also embed within the document either a comment or a highlighted or something that on page 2, paragraph 3, it will reference the standard. That is great as well. Again, as long as it is clear as to where to go. What you don't want to do is say citation in document, and then there's no citation in the document. We don't know where to look. We can't score it. We have to score it as not met and send it back for more information. Also, whole document, we might look in the wrong place and there could be a miscommunication, and that's not setting you up for success on the validation review. So really, in the citation box or embedded within the document, either are okay. Just please be as clear as you can.
Awesome. And then I do want to mention real quick that anytime you are working with a secondary organization who may be a vendor or a delegated entity, you cannot just incorporate or adopt their policies. So, you need to make sure that if you own the policy, you're doing the work. Otherwise, it's considered a delegated or vendor relationship, and you would have to work on determining how you document that relationship appropriately and based on the standards. So take a look at OPIN 1-2 if you're looking at that.
That's right, because if you are delegating certain functions to another entity, you don't need to upload their policies and procedures. There's another entity conducting that work for you. That's not for us to review. It's for us to review the work that you're doing. It's for us to review your oversight of how they're conducting that work to ensure compliance with the standards. But we shouldn't be looking at the specifics of what they're doing. If you're delegating to them, that's actually really your job.
Heather and Jen, I want to put up here, we've got like a minute to go. I just want to do a quick plug. URAC Connect is coming back this year. For those of you who have come, I see some familiar names. We will be in Washington, D.C., October 28th to 30th, a little bit later than this year, but same week as our last year. We will open registration in about a month, and we hope to see you there. URAC Connect is our annual conference for our current clients. It's really foundations of accreditation. We go through the review of the policies and procedures, or of URAC standards. Sorry, there, tripping over my words, same thing here. We have a fantastic panel at the end, always worth staying for, called Ask a Reviewer, and that's where you get to ask the reviewers kind of whatever is left on your mind. Our executive leadership team is there. Dr. Griffin is there. So if you are not a current client, but you think you're about to become a current client, you really want to work with us, talk to whoever you're working with on the business development side of things, and we'll see if it's a great fit for you. Heather, Jen, Jeff, and all 218 of you who were here today on a Friday afternoon, thank you so much for joining us. We did not get to all the questions, but we're going to send them in a follow-up email. We'll send the responses in the follow-up email. If you're a current client, send any existing clients. You can send any existing questions to your client relations manager. If you're not, you can send it to your business development manager, or eventually they'll get their way to us. Thank you so much for joining us. We loved having you here.